Hi friends, it's Miss Shari coming to you from this very dreary, rainy Easter morning. First, I want to say that I loved worshiping with you this morning, and the pictures I've seen of you all praying with me and sitting, watching on your tablets and your TVs have meant so much to me. I am waiting for the day that we can all be back together sharing the stairs because they're very lonely by themselves. I want to share one final Easter story with you this morning. Just kind of a all-encompassing book to talk about the journey we've had this week because it is such a wonderful story and one that we should not be quick to forget. So I want to share a story. It's entitled The Easter Story. Beautiful illustrations. It was a very exciting day in Jerusalem. Riding on a humble donkey, Jesus had arrived in the city for the festival of Passover. Cheers rang out from the crowd and palm leaves waved in the air. Everyone had come to see their king entering the city. "God bless the king who comes in the name of the Lord," they shouted. Many people laid palm leaves down from the donkey to walk upon. Everyone wanted to show their love and respect. Jesus went straight to the city's temple, where he got a terrible shock. In the temple's courtyard, people were burying goods, changing money, and selling animals. It was noisy and smelly. The air was filled with the shouts of sellers and the cries of animals. Jesus felt anger rise up inside of him. "The house of God is a house of prayer," he roared. "But you have turned it into a den of greed." He turned over the tables of goods and coins rained down to the ground. The sellers scurried away, making room for people to pray. Jesus' supporters cheered, but the chief priests were furious. "He wants to destroy our power over the people," they snarled. The priests controlled people by making them afraid, but people listened to Jesus because he talked about love. "If only we could get rid of him," the priests muttered. 6 days before the festival of Passover, Jesus and his disciples went to stay with some friends. They were served a special meal, and while they relaxed around the table, a woman opened a jar of expensive perfumed oil. She kneeled down and rubbed the oil into Jesus' head. "You could have sold that and given the money to the poor," snapped Judas, one of Jesus' disciples. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "She is being kind." But Judas felt angry with Jesus, and his anger allowed evil to creep into his heart. He knew that the chief priests didn't like Jesus, and he decided to help them get rid of him. 2 days before Passover, he met with them and agreed to lead them to Jesus when Jesus was alone. "I will kiss Jesus to show the guards who to arrest," he told the priests. In return, the priests promised to pay Judas 30 pieces of silver. Jesus knew that the priests were plotting against him. He also knew that it was all part of God's plan and that he would leave the world soon to join his Father in heaven. But he felt sad when he thought about what was going to happen. The evening before Passover, Jesus took some water and kneeled in front of each of the 12 disciples in turn. He gently washed their feet and dried them on a towel. "Lord, you should not wash our feet," said the disciples. "You are too important." "No one is more important than anyone else," Jesus said. "Even though I am your teacher, we are all equal because we are all God's children." On the day of Passover, Jesus and his disciples sat down to eat a special meal together. "Soon, one of you will betray me," Jesus told them. The disciples were shocked, all except Judas. "Who is it?" they asked. They didn't notice Judas turning pale. but Jesus would not speak Judas's name. He blessed the bread by saying a prayer, then broke it into pieces and handed it to his disciples. Like this bread, my body will be broken, he said. Please eat it. He blessed the wine and passed around the cup so they could all drink from it to show they were part of God's family. This wine is like my blood, which will be spilled for many people, he said. Please drink it. As they ate and drank, Jesus watched his disciples with sadness in his heart. Eat and drink to remember me, he said. We won't have another meal together until we are in God's kingdom. There was a quiet garden called Gethsemane where Jesus liked to pray. After the meal, he took Peter, James, and John there to pray with him. While they rested, Jesus fell to his knees to pray. He knew that the priests were coming for him, and he felt afraid. Father, I know what needs to happen, but it is going to be very hard, he said. Please help me. Jesus spoke to God for a long time, and his disciples fell asleep. Soon Judas entered the garden. Judas was followed by men armed with swords and fiery torches. Rise, Jesus called. Here comes the traitor. Peter, James, and John rose quickly, but it was too late. Judas had walked up to Jesus and kissed his cheek. It was his signal to the guard that this was the man to arrest. The guards grabbed Jesus by the arms and held him tightly. Peter wanted to fight, but Jesus stopped him. My Father in heaven will protect me, he said. The chief priests took Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. The Romans were in charge of Jerusalem, so it was Pilate's job to decide what would happen to prisoners. Pilate questioned Jesus, trying to find out if Jesus was an enemy of Rome. He knew that the chief priests wanted Jesus dead, but he believed Jesus was harmless. Early the next morning, a large crowd had gathered. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? Pilate asked them. The chief priests had already talked to the crowd and told them lies about Jesus. No, the people shouted, crucify him. Why? Pilate asked. What crime has he committed? But the crowd just kept shouting, crucify him. Pilate was a weak man and he wanted to please the people. So he had Jesus beaten and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers dressed Jesus in a purple robe to make fun of him. Purple was the color that kings wore, and they thought he had been pretending to be a king. They wanted to him and laughed at him. They even twisted together some thorns to make a crown. Hail, King of the Jews, they shouted, laughing at him. Jesus was forced to carry a heavy wooden cross through the crowded streets. All the way, people jeered and shouted at him. It was very different from the way he had arrived in Jerusalem. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross. Father, forgive them, Jesus whispered. They don't understand what they are doing. The minutes crept by like hours, and Jesus was in great pain. It became harder and harder for him to breathe. A crowd gathered, shouting nasty things at Jesus and making fun of him. If you are really the Son of God, you would save yourself, they jeered. Come down from the cross. Jesus did not reply. He felt as if each breath was tearing at his body. The sun shrank away, and the sky became dark and stormy, but the crowd and the priests kept shouting their cruel words. Finally, at 3 o'clock, with a loud cry, the Son of God took his last breath. Later that day, a Roman named Joseph took down Jesus' body, wrapped it in linen, and placed it in a tomb. Then he rolled a large, heavy stone over the entrance. Early the next morning, Mary Magdalene, one of Jesus' friends, came to visit the tomb. To her amazement, she found that the large stone had been rolled away. Mary stepped into the dark tomb and saw that Jesus' body was gone. All that was left were the strips of linen in which he had been wrapped. "He is not here," said a voice. Mary turned and saw a man dressed in all white. He was an angel, but she did not know that. She gasped in fear. "Do not be afraid," the man said. "Jesus has risen. Go tell his disciples." Trembling with shock and overcome with happiness, Mary fled from the tomb and ran to find Peter and John. At first, Peter and John did not believe Mary's story. They followed her to the tomb and ran inside. "Someone has stolen the body," they cried. "Who would have done such a thing?" They went to tell the other disciples what had happened, but Mary stayed behind. "What shall I do?" she cried, tears running down her face. She was afraid to be there alone, but she did not want to go home either. "Mary," said a gentle voice. She knew Jesus' voice at once, but how could it be him? A man stepped forward. "Master," Mary cried, falling to her knees before him. "Tell the disciples what you have seen," said Jesus. "I will soon be with my Father in heaven." Mary ran back to find the disciples. "I have seen my Lord with my own eyes," she cried. "He is risen from the grave." Over the next 40 days, Jesus appeared many times to the disciples. On the Mount of Olives near Jerusalem, he spoke to them one last time. "It is time for me to return to my Father in heaven," he said. "Everything has happened just as he said it would, but I will always be with you." The sun burst out from behind a bank of clouds. As golden beams of light dazzled them, the disciples watched Jesus rise up to heaven. Then 2 angels appeared, dressed in shimmering white. "Jesus will come back to you," they promised. The disciples shared smiles of love and happiness. They knew that until Jesus returned, they would keep his words alive. They would spread his message of love throughout the world. And so today, friends, on Easter, we celebrate the risen Lord, and we remember to spread his message of love and kindness and joy in all the ways we can, to all the people we can, as long as we ever can. Bye, friends.